on. So to start with, since we're pretty small, I'm thinking that we could, right, let me just let Julie in, and then I'll say it again. The original herbalist is not here. I'm not a clinical herbalist at all, but I do grow and use a lot of medicinal herbs and also use a lot of medicinal weeds. So that's what I'm going to focus on today, and also talk a little bit about some native medicinals. I'm Michelle DeLima, by the way. I work for the trustees as the engagement manager and normally organize this event and don't teach that much at it, but I'm doing an impromptu session today. So since we're a pretty small group, if you're comfortable unmuting yourself and talking about it, if you just want to put it in the chat, I would be curious to know if people have any experience with medicinal herbs, or if you're new to it. It would just help me teach to the right level. So if you want to say whether you're a novice or someone with a little bit of experience and a little bit about that, you can either say it in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand. Okay, we've got one novice. Oh, and I also cannot. 2 novices, okay. Oh, nice. Take herbs but never grown them. Cool. So I've taught classes about growing, common medicinal herbs that are easy to grow, and I'm happy to talk about that too. Most of what I have pictures and slides for here are things that you wouldn't need to grow because they're just going to pop up in your garden, or other people's gardens or farms. But I can definitely talk about growing herbs too. It's just I've always taught that outside, so I didn't have slides at the last minute to do. So I'm going to share my screen. Thanks for giving me a little background on all of you. And it's a small group. I don't think it'll be disruptive at all if you interrupt and ask questions. So feel free to do that. And also you can put things in the chat and Eden will read them out periodically. Okay, so let's get, oh my gosh, I realized I didn't even put nettles in the presentation. We're definitely going to talk about nettles. They're on the picture here, but I had taken them out of the presentation at some point. So this isn't in any particular order of importance or anything. Red clover is something that grows all over the place. Before we get started, I should give a disclaimer. So whenever you're harvesting food or medicine from the wild, you definitely want to make sure that it's in decent soil. As you probably know, a lot of the soil around here is contaminated with lead, mostly from old house paint, also to some degree from gasoline. There's sometimes worse contaminants from, or not worse, but other persistent contaminants from industrial uses of land. So it's good to know where you're harvesting from. A community garden, your garden plot, or a common area in the community garden is a great option. A home garden where you've tested the soil is great. And then, if you're friends with any farmers or you want to make friends with any farmers, most of them have most of these weeds on their land and will probably be happy for you to pick them. And they are not, and that's soil that's been tested and, is less likely to have industrial or house paint remnants. So red clover grows in lots of meadowy places, lots of lawns. So as long as you can find one where the soil is safe and it's not treated, it's really abundant. When it is blooming, it's really easy to harvest. The blossoms are pretty big. You just pull them off. I've found that drying them in a single layer is pretty important. If they don't get enough airflow, like drying them on a screen or something like that is good, because then otherwise they just lose all their color and I think some of their medicinal action too. So they're used typically for heart health, women's health, and it's also just a really nice tea. So people will use it. I mean, it's often used as raspberry leaf is as a PMS tea, but it's also just like a nice tea. It's a very gentle herb that you can just enjoy, even if not for medicinal reasons. I think that it's pretty easy to identify, but just gave a close up here of the leaves. There's this little telltale marking on the leaves. And then of course, once it's blooming, the flowers are probably pretty familiar to you, clover blossoms. And none of the clovers are poisonous or harmful. So even if you don't have the exact one, it's okay. Red clover is actually kind of a blanket term. There's a few different clovers that would qualify as this, but the one that's most often used medicinally is this one with, it's actually a dusky pink color, the blossom. And the bees love it too. So it's good for lots of things. Plantain, this is one of my favorite herbs. It's all over the place. I more commonly see this broadleafed one, but I also often see the lance leaf one. They're both medicinal, but the broadleaf, the leaves can get really big. So it's just easier to harvest from. I would say you get more. The most common way that I use it is if I get a wasp sting or a bee sting or some other kind of insect bite, you can chew it up and use it as a poultice. And it sounds kind of gross, but your teeth are really good at grinding it, and the enzymes in your saliva actually help to release some of the sort of mucilaginous stuff in the leaf that is really soothing. It doesn't just soothe the skin, it actually is really good at drawing things out. So that's why it's really nice for stings. And
Michelle, I apologize to interrupt. There was a question about red clover, which was, I think, previously. So.
Sure, yeah, what's that?
It might be related to your previous slide.
Or different. It looks like different. Yeah. Yes, Kate. So there are a few different red clovers used as cover crop, but most of them have that, like you said, that darker kind of scarlet color. And this one, even though it's called red, is really more of like a purpley pink. So plantain, that's the way that I've used it most commonly. I've also used it in a skin salve along with St. John's wort, calendula, and sometimes comfrey, although I'm kind of moving away from the comfrey because the little hairs can irritate my skin if I don't filter it really well. And that is, you steep all of those in olive oil for a couple of weeks, and then melt some beeswax. You strain it and melt some beeswax into that. And it's the only thing, I have eczema, and it is the only thing that has ever really helped. It's even better than like the steroid cream that dermatologists will prescribe, for me anyway. Eczema is kind of a broad term for a lot of different skin irritations, but for me, it really helps. It's caused because your dry skin gets cracks in it, and the staph bacteria that normally lives on the surface of your skin actually goes into those cracks and causes irritation and itching, and the skin breaks even more. And what's really neat about this combination is I think it helps in a few different ways. So the plantain is really soothing. The calendula and the St. John's wort are both pretty good antibacterial herbs, and just calendula, I've used lots of calendula salves. It doesn't seem to do as much, but St. John's wort really helps. It really seems to have a more potent antibacterial action. And you can also take plantain internally. So people make infusions of it. If you have, trouble with your stomach lining being irritated, or you're just in general, your gastrointestinal lining, plantain is a nice herb to add to a tea blend. It's kind of boring to drink on its own taste-wise, but you could. But I think it'd be better in combination with some of the other things we're going to talk about. So burdock, you may be familiar with this. My favorite fact about this plant is that the seed heads are the inspiration for Velcro. And if you see them in the fall, the way that they stick to your clothing and stick to one another and have these little teeth, you can really see it. So I think you can sort of see these are them before they dry out and become brown. But probably most of us had the experience of, walking through a field or a field edge and getting these stuck to our socks and pants before. Medicinally, the root is what's mostly used. It's a biennial, meaning that it takes 2 years for its life cycle to complete. So the first year it has what's called a basal rosette. And this is an example of that. You can see all of the leaves coming out from one main point, and they're not really growing up a stalk at all. So many biennials grow this way. The first year you've got the basal rosette, and then the second year they put up a flower stalk, and they have smaller leaves generally up that stalk, and that's where the flowers and seeds are formed. So the best time to dig burdock is in the fall, late fall, like early November, mid-November, as long as the ground isn't frozen and when the top has started to die back. That's true for most medicinal roots because they put a lot of the plant's energy and, all of its compounds are up in the aerial parts when those, leaves and flowers, when those are around. But in fall, to survive the winter, it'll send everything, all the food and energy in the plant will go back down into the root. So you want to get it. Then you could also do early spring, but it's a little harder to get the timing right there. And it's much easier to find them in fall when the leaves are still around. In spring, by the time they've started to sprout and become more visible, you're already losing some of the nice food that would be down in the root. So the burdock is really hard to dig. The roots can be longer than a foot. So just don't expect to get all of it, maybe, but definitely a full-size spade, not like a little garden trowel, but a regular big shovel is the way to go. And you might not get all of it, and that's okay. But the root, you want to scrub it pretty well to clean it, and then it can be dried or fresh, but you can dry it to store it and make a tea out of it. I really like the tea. We've tasted it in some mug classes. I feel like people have mixed feelings. I really enjoy it. It's a little bit malty tasting. It's a little bit bitter, but not as bitter as dandelion or something. It's kind of earthy, and it is a little bit of a diuretic. So just be aware that that's an effect. It's going to make you go to the bathroom a little more. But that's part of what is supposed to be good about it, in terms of detoxification. And it's also supposed to be good for liver health and digestion, and it can be eaten. So it's really commonly eaten in Japanese cuisine and by macrobiotic people, people who follow macrobiotic diet. It's called gobo. And there's culinary or cultivated rather varieties of it that are cooked with, but the wild one is totally edible too. It can be a little bit fibrous, but if you stew it or you pickle it, you can lacto ferment it and make a really nice pickle. It's pretty good, and it's supposed to be a really nourishing food. And when I say eczema and rashes for this one, it's not external like you wouldn't use this topically, but there are a few herbs, including burdock, including dandelion, which we'll talk about later, that because of their detoxification properties are supposed to help with things like eczema and rashes, which are related to liver function and blood cleansing. So any questions before I move on? Has anyone had burdock? Do you guys remember having it in mug? Yeah. It's not really a ringing endorsement over there, but. Somebody commenting in the chat here. That's great. Kate says she had it in mug and would have to look at her notes. Oh, Ro, you eat it. That's cool. Do you forage it to eat, or have you bought it, or?
I've never foraged it before. I've only eaten it. I think it's mostly like fermented. So I really enjoy it in like stews, and sometimes they'll put it in like this sushi roll called futomaki, which has like, I think like 4 or 5 other types of like vegetables, but it has a good crunch to it when it's pickled. Nice.
Yeah, I've had the pickles. They're really good. And that's cool. Thank you. It's a neat note. I had something else that made me think of, but now I can't remember. Oh, I know I already mentioned this, but I'm going to say it again for this. So for root crops, that's what I thought of when I mentioned foraging it. You really do want to make sure, I mean, with all of these you do, but when you're eating root crops, you definitely want to make sure that you're harvesting from a safe place, because they're much more likely to accumulate lead and other toxins, heavy metal toxins specifically, than other parts of the plant. Leaves will also accumulate those things, but roots are number one, and especially something with a very long root like that is very good at drawing nutrients and contaminants. So chickweed is kind of the bane of maybe not quite the bane of their existence, but definitely a pest to a lot of farmers. It really loves to grow. A lot of people are growing in high tunnels or low tunnels to extend the season, little moist environments where the temperature is kind of modulated, and chickweed really loves to grow in them. My favorite story about chickweed is that I was once at the Somerville Farmers Market, and a farmer was selling these $5 little bags of a green with white flowers on it. And he was calling it like starflower or something. And I was like, is that chickweed? Are you selling your greenhouse weeds? And he was like, don't tell anyone. It is tasty, kind of. I don't I don't like the stemminess of it that much, but some people do like to eat it as a green. It makes a really nice juice if you have a juicer. And he was calling it starflower, and its Latin name is Stellaria something. I don't remember the second name. So it's a little bit hard to tell from these pictures, but it has these kind of asterisk like star-shaped flowers. It has prostrate stems, meaning it like kind of creeps across the ground. It likes moist, shady, and rich spots, and it's really high in chlorophyll and a number of vitamins, and herbalists use it for its cooling action, both internally and externally. So externally, you can make a poultice, which when I'm saying that, all it really is to juice something or mash it up and put it on your skin. And sometimes you'll put a clean cloth over it and kind of tie it on for a while. So that is used for a poultice for rashes and inflammations and eczema. And it's supposed to be one of the better herbs for eczema. I didn't really find that, I haven't used it enough maybe to have it. I tried it a few times and didn't really love it. But that's just me. So the greens or the tea are also supposed to be good for your liver and for blood cleansing. So it's one of these herbs that both internally and externally has kind of a similar action, a cleansing, cooling action. And it's really abundant if you do have it, you know, the weed, there's usually a lot of it. So it's a nice, easy one to harvest. And again, if you know any farmers, they probably have it in their low tunnel, and you can harvest it from there, even this time of year. So another one, a really abundant herb, especially I think in a lot of our community gardens, it may be, and not to confuse it, there are a couple of herbs that look, weeds, whatever, that look kind of like this, that are in the mint family. So there's dead nettle is another one that we have a lot of in the community gardens, but this one too, especially at City Natives, we have a lot. It likes moist, shady spaces. It really seems to like to grow in rich areas. So if there's a lot of compost, it's common. It's different from the other ones that I mentioned, dead nettle and also henbit, because it has smooth leaves, whereas those are a little bit hairy. They're all in the mint family, and it has a square stem like anything in the mint family. So that's one way to identify it. And it has these cute little scalloped leaves. It's also known as creeping Charlie or gill over the ground. You might have heard it called either of those things. So it's got similar medicinal action to any other mint. The tea is often used for coughs and colds, and for digestion, especially helpful for soothing gas and indigestion. And it tastes pleasant. It's not quite as strong and minty as mint, but it has a nice green taste along with a minty taste. And then it also has some antiviral properties and is actually being studied for those, for colds and I can't remember what other, I saw a few different things that it's being studied for its antiviral action. So we'll see. But it's a really common, plentiful herb. So that's nice. We have this all over at our nursery and learning garden in City Natives. And I mean, more than I really need. It spreads pretty readily like any other mint. But it's nice that you can use it at least. Common blue violet. Probably a lot of people are familiar with this. This is, the most common violet around here. It also grows from a basal rosette. It has these lovely heart-shaped leaves. This isn't the best picture. I should have done another picture that did a little more justice to the beauty of these flowers. They're really nice. Sometimes they're white with a kind of purple-blue veining, depending at sometimes they go through that as a stage. But it's all the same plant, and both the flowers and the leaves are edible. I love making syrup out of the flowers. It makes a beautiful addition to a cocktail or dessert. Some people candy the flowers. I don't quite have that level of patience, but one of my coworkers does, and they're really lovely. You can use them like to garnish cakes or salads. And then the properties of the plant, it's a demulcent. So it has kind of I'm trying to think of a not gross way to say it. It has a soothing quality that's partly because of it's like a mucilaginous plant, both the flowers and especially the leaves. It's also anti-inflammatory, and it's used as an expectorant to help with break up mucus in coughs. And you can take it as a tea, you can take it as a syrup, or you can eat it. and you can get its medicinal benefits any of those ways. This is one of the herbs that's very gentle in its action. It's like safe for kids. It doesn't have any interactions, and it's not something you can like overdose on. It's really pretty mild. So, and it's a nice early spring green, even if you don't want it for the medicinal reasons. It's, you know, nice to have something green and tasty early in the spring. Lots of nutrients. And speaking of that, another tasty, although much less mild and gentle spring green, the dandelion, which I'm sure is familiar to everybody. It has these really deeply toothed leaves. The name actually comes from Dandelion, lion's tooth. So you can kind of see that up here, how jagged these are. It's obviously very widely adapted, very common. You know, if you're harvesting it, you want to make sure that you're harvesting it from a safe place, because a lot of people spray herbicides in places where dandelions are, so look out for that. And you can use the leaves, especially in the early spring. They get pretty bitter and also a little bit fibrous and tough, but earlier in the season, they make a nice salad green. I love bitter things, and I don't really love like just straight dandelion salad, but mixing it with some other wild greens or greens from the garden, they do add a nice flavor, but they can be a little intense if you don't have that much of a taste for bitter. One way to deal with that is to make them into a pesto, where I think the strong, you know, the strength and the bitterness and sort of spiciness is just mellowed a bit by having some nuts in there, some cheese, some olive oil, maybe some lemon juice. You can also cook them, which, you know, they might not be quite as nutritious, but they're definitely still good for you, and they'll be a little milder. And I always find that using some vinegar, it's kind of paradoxical, but using some vinegar or some lemon juice on a really bitter or spicy green like this mellows it. So that's a nice way to sort of make it a little more, you know, dress it well, to make it a little more palatable. Medicinally, the roots are the most powerful part. They are a strong diuretic. They definitely are noticeably diuretic, which means that, you know, they make you urinate more. But what's cool about them is that they do that without depleting your potassium levels. So that's kind of neat. A lot of other diuretics can lower your potassium, and dandelion doesn't. It's supposed to be, you know, herbalists use it for sluggish livers or overloaded livers. And it also, dandelion is a great, it's pretty bitter, and it can help stimulate digestion. I don't know much about this. I have read that it's supposed to be helpful with normalizing blood pressure, but I don't know like what the dosage and what the action there really is. One thing I do know is that the roasted root coffee, I mean, I hesitate to call anything coffee that does not have caffeine in it, which is I love the taste of coffee, but I'm really after that pick me up. So it's not caffeinated, but it does have a nice earthy flavor. It's super delicious with like a little bit of maple syrup and a little milk of some sort, whatever you like. Making the roasted root coffee is a little bit of a job. You can also purchase it. A lot of these herbs, if you don't find them, if you don't have a safe place to harvest them, but you want to try them, mountain rose is a great source for mail ordering stuff. If you live, you know, around or near Cambridge, you can go to, or actually, I think they have one in Brookline too. I think it's Brookline. There's a store called Cambridge Naturals that has bulk herbs from mountain rose, so you can try all this stuff. And then there's also a place I've ordered from online, a little small company called Dandelion Botanicals. Their website is not nearly as like fancy. It's basically like a spreadsheet, but if you know what you're looking for, it's affordable and it's a small company. But if you want to make your own and you have a safe place to harvest from, you basically in the fall, in the, you know, early November or so, dig the roots. You could do it in early spring too. Dig the roots like burdock, not quite like burdock, but they're pretty long. There is a tool called a dandelion fork that you can use to get down there, or you can just use, you know, a spade or something. Just loosen up the soil well and get out as much as you can. The difference is the roots are much smaller. So in order to make this coffee, you need to like have a good field of dandelions, or, you know, a lot of them, and some patience. And then I usually soak them because they're dirty and it's hard to get the soil off. Soak them for a day or a few hours and then brush them like a semi-stiff brush to get them clean. Rinse them a couple times, and then they need to be dried out in a low oven, say like 250 or something like that. And then once they're pretty dry and they'll snap, then you can turn it up to like 400, watch them carefully and roast them. And then they can be ground and made like coffee, although you don't have to, you can make them more like instant coffee where you just stir them in. You don't have to, and strain it. You don't have to like brew it, although you could. And it's pretty delicious. But again, does have that diuretic effect, be aware. Got something in the chat. Oh, the leaves. Yeah, I've seen bunches of the leaves. There are cultivated varieties of dandelion. It's eaten a lot in Italy, maybe other places too. That's where I've seen it. And there are these cultivated varieties. Yeah, those bunches are like this long. They're really intense. And I think they're a little bit milder, but they're still pretty bitter. But yeah, if you want to try eating the greens and you don't have a good source for them in the wild, or you don't want to wait for that, you definitely can purchase them. So let's see, mullein. Mullein is a pretty striking plant. It has, again, it's one of these biennials or first year. It has a basal rosette, which is this beautiful fuzzy thing here. And then the second year, it sends up this pretty dramatic flower spike. It's used a lot for lung ailments. So it can be for breaking up mucus, for irritations in the lungs. It's also supposed to help with immunity, specifically for respiratory infections. And then people use it for smoking cessation. They actually smoke it. And I don't really understand this or why, but people smoke it so instead of smoking tobacco, and as a like transition out of smoking tobacco. The oil, I have done this, steep the flowers in oil to make it an oil for ear infections, which is a long, it's a very old use of this plant. And it does work in my experience, unless it was a coincidence. All right. So there, I just went through all of the slides that I have. So I'm going to stop my screen share. Maybe make us a gallery. Feel free to turn your video on if you want. So is mullein different from lamb's ears? Good question, Ro. It does have a similarly fuzzy leaf, but it is different. The mullein is a little more bristly, and lamb's ears are a little bit even softer, and they don't send up that, they don't have that big spike. They're both pretty fun plants, and they're fun plants for kids' gardens. You know, if you want to do like a sensory garden, both lamb's ear and mullein are kind of fun textures. Be aware with mullein, it will go everywhere. That flower spike makes a lot of flowers and a lot of seeds, and they'll go all over the place. So if you save it, you know, be aware of that. I've also found with harvesting the flowers in order to make the oil, they all bloom at different times. So it was kind of like a gathering and waiting, just dropping them into oil, but like coming back and gathering all of them. You can't just cut it and you know, in one and done. So what else did I say I would talk about? Oh yeah, so growing, I mean, some of our common culinary herbs are great medicinal herbs. Honestly, peppermint is probably one of my go-to medicinal herbs. It really, well, because I don't have fantastic digestion, and it really helps with indigestion, gas, discomfort. That's really notably helpful. The other thing I found really helpful for that is fennel seed, which is another thing that we can grow. And a lot of people use thyme and sage for respiratory ailments. So it's kind of nice to have something that does double duty as a culinary and medicinal herb. And also thyme and sage are really easy to grow in containers. So that's a nice perk if you don't have a lot of space. Those are fun ones to grow. I'm just going to see if, oh, sensory garden. So Kate, sorry, I know it's a little off topic, but I'm curious. Was this an indoor sensory garden?
No, it was outside. It was a show with Monty Dunn, the British gardener guy, but I forget the name of it right now. It's about gardening in small spaces, except their spaces aren't really that small because they don't live in the city. So
you're like, I'll show you small.
Yeah, sometimes they're small, but sometimes they're not small at all. But yeah, it was like their patio. It was super cute. And they made like such a nice garden for their kid who like couldn't really go out much. And she was like really excited. It's very adorable.
It's really nice. Yeah, sensory gardens can be really fun. I think, sometimes people do them for kids that are visually impaired, but it's also, I think, just nice for anyone. I guess it's not just a kid thing, but it's, and a lot of these herbs, especially the culinary ones that I just mentioned, would be great in that too, for their fragrance, if not for their texture. I wanted to mention a few of my other favorites that are native plants that are, have medicinal qualities. So elderberry, which is the European elderberries are very vigorous growers, with the American ones, the native ones, are a little bit more diminutive and delicate. So they don't produce as huge an amount of flowers and fruit, but they're can fit better into a small garden. They're great because, they benefit there's a lot of native insects that will use them, either eat their leaves or, come to their flowers. But they're also really useful for us. So I do a lot of cocktail and makings with native plants, or with plants in general, and elderflowers are really fun for that. Making elderflower cordial, which is actually not alcoholic, but is a great element. It's just sugar and lemon and water, and steeping elderflowers in it, but also the syrup is really delicious. One note is that it really does have a immune stimulating property. So if you have an autoimmune condition, it's something you'd want to use caution with. I didn't understand that. And I do have I have a rheumatoid arthritis and I can't take it. It makes my joints hurt, which is kind of cool. It's working, it's stimulating my immune system, but that's not, for me, a good thing. Yeah, they taste really similar. I actually think the taste of it's a little bit more delicate, and those kind of spicy and other, not just berry notes, but the other notes that elderberry has are a little more pronounced in the native one, I think. But otherwise it tastes pretty much the same, and it's beautiful. It makes this beautiful purple syrup. It's really easy to harvest a lot of it. This year was a little bit harder to harvest it because the birds, it was, in a drought year, they're really desperate for berries, and they were just descending and taking them all. And I didn't really honestly want to take too many from them in that circumstance, but I have a couple cultivated ones in my house that had plenty on there. So it's really easy to make the syrup. You just cook it with water for a while, a little bit of water for a while, break it down, and strain and sweeten it. And you can use raw honey or sugar or whatever you want. One thing about elderberry is that the green parts of the plant are not good for you. And in very large quantities, they can be toxic. So you have to pull the berries off of the flower heads before you cook them down and make sure there's not a lot of stem left, which makes it a little labor intensive, but it's pretty fun to do with friends. Just kind of gather around outside or whatever and pull your berries and chat, and you feel like a pioneer person or something. It's pretty fun. Yeah, and it is really tasty even if you don't need it medicinally, but it's also one that has some good evidence for it, some really good evidence for its antiviral properties. So, if you're starting to get the flu or a cold or something, especially early on, if you take a tablespoon 3 or 4 times a day of the syrup, it can really help. It's been shown to most effective at shortening the duration of a virus, rather than just making it go away. But what else do I have? Arnica, which is not native to our exact area, but it is a North American meadow plant. And that is used, you can make an infusion of that to use on bumps and bruises and joint pain. It helps with pain and inflammation. I feel like there were just 2 I wanted to tell you about. And what else do we use medicinally around here? I guess those are the heavy hitters. I don't know if anybody has other plants they're interested in trying. Oh, okay, not native. Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me. So this is one of my favorite plants. I can't believe I forgot it. So nettles, which are easy to find in certain areas. There's a lot in parts of JP and other parts of Boston. They grow in rich, moist areas generally. I actually really love them as a food plant primarily, but they are a wonderful medicinal plant too. Oh, and then remind me, I want to talk about Tulsi. That's another great one. So nettles are classified as an adaptogen, which basically means they help the body's systems adapt to stress in numerous ways. They're really nutritive, so they're very high in iron for a plant. And they're pretty just high in a lot of different minerals and vitamins that do come through in an infusion. So you have to, when you make an infusion herbal tea, you're not just like pouring some hot water and steeping it for 15 minutes or something. I always laugh when I see those like traditional medicinals tea bags or something that have you steep a medicinal for 15 minutes. It's really, you're not going to get a lot out of it that way. So an overnight steep or at least 4 hours and a pretty high, like a higher concentration. So let's say you have a jar like this is 3 cups. I would put, like a half cup. It depends on the herb. But of a leafy thing like nettle, I would probably put a half cup in here and then put hot, not quite boiling, but hot water on top of it, steep it overnight and then strain it. And then you can keep that in the fridge. So you can make a whole quart and just keep it in the fridge for a few days. It doesn't keep forever, but that works. And then for any of the roots we talked about, when I talk about a tea, that should actually be a decoction, which is a boiled tea. So you bring it to a boil and then simmer for 15 or 20 minutes before straining. So you would not want to do that with something delicate like a leaf or a flower, but with things that are drier and harder to get, like dried berries, bark, and roots. That really does help. That's really how to get most of the stuff, the goods out of them. So yeah, nettle has also been studied, and there's some evidence for it for allergies. So people use it as capsules and whatever, but I think the tea is probably the easiest way if you're foraging it yourself. That's a tea that some people don't like. I love it. It tastes kind of pretty vegetal, pretty minerally. I think it's delicious. And a side note, I've not tried this yet, but I'm going to try the spring making a nettle cordial, which supposedly tastes like apricot, has an apricot-y flavor. Kate, I don't like it, but I know it's so healthy. I wish I did. Well, you might develop a taste for it. There's like some things that I didn't like that eventually, through slowly forcing myself exposure therapy, I then liked them. So a place to harvest, I'll say this as long as you promise to harvest not too many, because it's my own spot too. The Mint and Stable Garden in JP has along the like edges of, not of the garden part, but the park part, there are quite a few nettles. It likes to grow in semi-shady spots like that, like on the edge. And they're good to harvest. You can harvest them at any point, but they're good to harvest before the flowers have really gotten going. Kate, I just kind of assume that it is, which I know is not what I told you to do. It hasn't been a house or an industrial site there. So, but I don't really know much about like the early history of it. I know there used to be stables in that area, and I don't know what they were painted with or where exactly they were. It's because there were stables there that the nettles like it there so much. I assume they tend to get started in places they love to grow in pastures and in manure piles. So I figure if that was the horse manure pile, it's probably fine. It's not where there were buildings. Not really paranoid. No, you're right, Kate. I shouldn't be so laissez-faire about it. I do also sometimes harvest them from a friend's farm where it's a little safer. But yeah, they're delightful. You can also purchase them if you don't have a good place, and you can use them dried. And if you pick your own, you can also dry them. They're not that hard to dry. Hang them in small bunches. And when the leaves are thoroughly dry and on a dry day, then just store them in a jar. And then I wanted to, so they are also available for purchase at through one of those mail order companies like Mountain Rose or Dandelion Botanicals, or at Cambridge Naturals. I'm sure there's other places that sell bulk herbs, but I don't know them around here. Thanks for putting Kate, put the Mountain Rose link in there in the chat. I appreciate that. So yeah, another herb I want to talk about. Oh, Julie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have kind of a more conceptual question.
Okay.
it's so interesting because I thought, oh, this is going to be about, growing herbs. And now that you're really talking about foraging herbs, which is so interesting. I'm really not a gardener. So maybe I'm just a little bit like naive to all this, but I'm so curious now, like how it is that all of these amazing medicinal plants are plants that like we're foraging in places that might have been a bad, like a wasteland, or we just, happen to find them and they're kind of considered more like weeds or nuisances or things that just grow on their own, not an intentional garden. Like it's so interesting. Like where did that shift happen, and like what broke down?
It's a good question. I think one of the things is that most of what I'm talking about, with the exception of a couple that I highlighted, these are non-native plants, so they do act like weeds here. They don't have a lot of natural predators, like not a lot of insects are eating them. They're not being kept under control that well. So for that reason, they get seen as weedy. But really, these are plants that, anyone who has European ancestors, they've been, we're using for many generations and were considered useful. And I think it's partly just that, not living on the land and not being connected to that. And then much like, I think folk herbalism, it's similar to the way that, the people who were using that and practicing it, they were peasants, right? And it's something that as people got away from that, they were happy to get away from it and to purchase medicine and that was seen as social mobility and a good thing and modernity. And I'm not against, I'm getting the vaccine tomorrow. I'm totally pro modern medicine, but I think there's also a lot of, good use to be had or good. There's multiple benefits I find when I grow and harvest or forage my own medicine and prepare it. Like already I'm doing better than if I hadn't done that, even if it doesn't actually do any good for me. The act of doing that, just like a lot of us know with the act of growing our own food or foraging our own food, is itself like a really healthful and beneficial thing. So I think a lot of people are getting back to it for that reason and starting to say, like, why should we ignore this plant? Dandelion, like it's a nutritional powerhouse, it's everywhere. Could we just eat it instead of vilifying it and pouring Roundup on it? So it's a good question. It has a lot to do with, I think, our general cultural disconnect from the land.
Thank you.
And what? Oh yeah, Tulsi. So this is a herb from the Ayurvedic tradition. It's holy basil. There's a few different kinds. They all have pretty similar action. It's a really soothing, it helps, it's not necessarily like a sedative, but it's a great anxiety herb. And if you have insomnia, that's sort of anxiety related, it's great for that. I don't find that teas are great for my personal variety of insomnia because I don't want to drink tea before bed. But if I'm feeling stressed like during the day and I want to wind down in the evening or something, I find Tulsi to be really helpful and really delicious and super easy to grow, just like basil. But maybe even more so. It really readily seeds itself. It grows, from just a small plant, it grows into this big bushy thing. You can harvest a ton of it. And it has sort of a funky, it's somewhat related to basil, but it has this whole other funky flavor to it that I really enjoy. And we sell seedlings of that if anyone wants to get it. I should mention, not all of these, but a few of what we've talked to, the non-weedy ones. I'm not selling the weedy ones, but at City Natives, in Mattapan, we have plant sales and we grow some of these medicinal herbs there. I haven't talked about chamomile, but that's another really easy one to grow, really gentle, soothing herb, great for stomach upset and then for insomnia or, just difficulty sleeping as it's most known for. And if you don't think you like chamomile, the fresh flowers, or the ones that you dry yourself, but they just haven't been sitting in a tea bag for Lord knows how long, are so good. I think I never liked it as a dry tea, but as one that I harvest myself, it has this kind of appley, honey-ish scent and flavor to it that is really delicious. And it's also very fun to just like pick flowers and make them into a tea. As far as a sensory experience, it smells good, it's pretty. And I use it more for a stomach thing. Like if you have like kind of stomach cramps or irritation of that sort, it's really soothing and gentle. And it's another one that's like safe for kids and, has a really mellow action. And one plant will make a lot of flowers. It is kind of laborious to harvest the flowers. I think when they do it, when people do it professionally, they use these little, there's like little devices, kind of like little rakes with teeth that you can use to pull the flowers off, which I haven't tried, but it seems like it would be nice because picking each individual blossom is definitely a labor of love.
So Michelle, I was wondering about the chamomile.
Mm-hmm.
Which variety would you grow if you start from seeds?
I have usually started just a German chamomile. That's just what it's called. But this time I'm doing, it's called Zlotylan. Fedco's offering that. It sounds pretty good. It's supposed to be really robust, shorter plants with lots of flowers. So it's ZLOTY space LAN is the one that I'm trying. And it does grow really well from seed. I'm starting some for City Natives for our plant sales, but you really can start it yourself just fine. Oh, that's interesting. Your tea came out bitter. I've not had that experience. I would be maybe a little careful about how you're drying them. Was it dry tea?
Yeah, I'm drying them like on a cookie sheet with a towel.
Maybe try drying them on a screen where they get better airflow.
Cool.
And see if that preserves more of the nice flavor and doesn't give you that funky flavor, because that doesn't sound, it's usually not really bitter. I wouldn't describe it as bitter. So that
yeah, it's very bitter, but probably good for you, I kind of assume.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. In general, yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about drying herbs. In general, lots of airflow, but not a lot of light is your ideal, which is honestly a hard thing to achieve. So I have a hallway in our house. It's like one of these cut up triple deckers. So I hang stuff in the hallway. It's not perfectly dark, but it's darker than most, and it has decent airflow. And most of us are living in apartments, and you're just going to do it wherever you can. But try to, hang them, like not hanging against a wall, but hanging across a hallway or a wall, so that there's a hallway or a room rather, so that they're getting plenty of airflow, and then just not leaving them up forever. Like once they're nice and dry on a dry day, take them down and pack them into a jar, because you don't want to lose too much. Also, a word about when you harvest them. You want to harvest, I love this, herbalists say, as soon as the dew has dried in the morning. So a lot of the volatile oils that make things taste good and smell good and have medicinal properties are volatile. So they will, if it's hot, like above 80 degrees, especially, they'll kind of go off into the air and evaporate. So that's what, if you walk in and you smell all the herbs in the air, that's great, but you want those oils in the plant. So harvesting when it's cool, but when the plant is dry. And generally the morning is the best time for that. I mean, you could do in the evening too, but the morning is ideal. So harvesting, and then, soon after that, hanging them, or in the case of something like chamomile or red clover, picking them off and laying them on a screen. Hey, Renee, welcome. So yeah, some herbs definitely dry more readily than others. A lot of those Mediterranean herbs like thyme and sage that are sort of, especially rosemary, they'll just kind of dry, like if you leave them out on the counter. They're really easy to dry, whereas some, like mint, is a little kind of more succulent, fleshier, and you need to take a little more care with it. I've had the best luck drying it in a dehydrator. I would never, we have a dehydrator, we use it to like make food for backpacking and stuff like that. So I sometimes use it, but you definitely don't need that. You don't need anything fancy for this. Just like some simple screens, or just tying things in bundles and hanging them from strings works just fine. If I had light here, I could show you. I mean, it should not still be hanging here. This is me not following my own advice. I had way more Tulsi than a person needs. And so some of it I haven't gotten to putting away yet, but I have it hanging. I don't know if you can see that. So I make little bundles, just use rubber bands and twine, and it works pretty well. There, you got a glimpse into my very messy hallway. It's used for drying herbs and storing lots of other things. And I do, I mean, I should take that down. I definitely should, but I also kind of enjoy having them around. Like they're nice decoration as well. Yeah, I don't know. Any other questions, Lance, you want to talk about? I can mention another way of preparing. Most of the things we talked about do well as either we talked about teas or decoctions or infused oils like that skin salve that I mentioned. But another great way to prepare herbs that where they will last for much longer is tinctures. So most of the things we mentioned are not really things that would need to be tinctured. Sometimes people do tincture elderberry. The traditional way is definitely to make a syrup out of it. But you can tincture it. It draws, so some medicinal compounds are drawn out by alcohol better than by boiling water. So tincturing is taking a strong alcohol. It should ideally be something over 100 proof. So you can use something like Everclear or grain alcohol or just like a high proof vodka, kind of a neutral alcohol. And then they're super easy to make. You would just put, about like a quarter of your vessel with the plant matter and then cover it with alcohol and let it, and that would make you, this would make you far more tincture than you need. So you could also do, just do cup jars and fill a third or half with an herb and cover the rest with this alcohol. And then you should shake it. They say every day. I don't think it's like so vital. If you shake it every few days, that's good. You steep for about 4 weeks and then you can strain, and then that will last pretty indefinitely. And those you really only need to take a few drops. So even if you don't, it's not like you're drinking a shot of it or something. You just need to take a few drops because they're much more potent. I've done tinctures with mugwort. I have done, you can do elderberry, especially if you don't want the syrup, the sugar of the syrup. Oh yeah, Kate, this is great. This is actually who got me started with all of this stuff, flower folk herbs. I don't know, is it Steph teaching the class or is it?
Yeah, it's Steph and also Jenny together.
Oh, that's great. So Jenny Hoff, Muddy River Botanicals, and Steph, Muddy River Herbals, I think. And then Steph Zabel of Flower Folk Herbs are two great local herbalists who, Jenny grows a lot of her own herbs. Steph is more of a teacher and a clinical herbalist, although I don't know if she's doing that much anymore, but they're both really knowledgeable and wonderful people. Steph has presented to Mug many times. I don't know if any of you were there for her, but that is a wonderful class. Or I haven't taken that class, but I took Herbs for Everyday Living. It was like a 6-week thing. In the evening, works with a working schedule and worked with my work schedule, and it was really nice. It was a great way to learn about a bunch of different plants, but then also each week we learned a different preparation. There's another preparation called oxymel, which is you steep a vinegar and honey combination. And that's like a really old kind of herbal technique that is pretty delicious and effective for some herbs. So this, yeah, you put a link in there, right? So if anyone is interested in going a little deeper for a year. Wow, cool. That's great. There's also Commonwealth, I'm not remembering the rest of the name, but Commonwealth School of Herbal Studies or something like that. So there's a few good spots around here where you can take some, like academically rigorous kind of, that's a more rigorous herbal training, but I think they do casual classes too. Yes, that's it. Thanks, Kate. You're great. Adding all this stuff to the chat. I really appreciate it. Oh, while we're talking about that, I have some stuff. Oh, it's not on this. Okay. I have a few links. Do you have them handy, Eden?
I do. Yeah, I was going to post
Okay,
them.
great.
Is this good time to do
I
it?
think it might be time. I'm sort of.
Yeah, I'll do that now.
So some of them I forgot the beginning, so they're not actual links. I forgot how it works in Zoom. But just a little bit of information for you all, or so this is the end of the Gardeners Gathering. So we have an event survey. If you could, it's really quick and you can get a chance to win a $25 gift certificate to City Natives. So that's my incentive for you. And what else? The Gardeners Gazette, which is our monthly newsletter. I think a lot of you probably already get it, but if you don't, you can sign up for that. And a survey about the waterfront work the trustees is doing if you want to express your preferences and opinions about what a big new waterfront park in the city should look like, and you know, how it should serve our communities. And we would love to hear from you. You don't have to be from East Boston to weigh in on that. And then also all of our most of our spring classes, April to June, are up online. Most of them are going to be hybrid or online. So it doesn't matter where you are, although we're definitely going to do some, we're hoping to do some in the gardens, but then also stream them so we can have more people come. So yeah, all of that is in the chat. And if there's no other questions or comments, I guess we can wrap up a little bit early.
One quick question I do have. I just wanted to make sure I had it right because I'm definitely going to make it your plantain solution.
Oh, yeah.
You soaked it with olive oil and then filtered it and then melted beeswax into it?
Yes. So if you want like a little more guidance on like the general process of making a salve and how to have it end up with a good consistency, if you just search like DIY herbal salve, you'll probably find some better directions that I'm going to probably be able to give you verbally. But what I do for that is equal parts of St. John's wort when flowering tops.
Mm-hmm.
That's the flowers and some of the leaves. Plantain and calendula blossoms, and steep them and warm up the olive oil a little bit and then pour it over all those things. And if you find them at different times, you can just steep them separately, and steep all of those for like about 4 weeks and then strain. And then you can melt in beeswax until you get a nice consistency. And it's really awesome. I've even used it on dog hot spots. So there's a placebo effect there, right? It works.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I hope it helps you. All right. Take care, everyone. You probably know where to reach me if you need anything, if you have any more questions. Thanks for coming to the gathering.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle, and for a great
Thank you, Michelle.
conference. Thank you. Take care.